So unfortunately, we have come to a point within our culture where I need to talk about politics in relation to fiction. I hate politics. I don't want to talk about it, but we're going to jump in because I think that I think it's needed. I think it's needed to understand how we should approach fiction in relation to politics and whether we should include it or whether we shouldn't, or the nuances of that subject. So we're going to jump into it today. Welcome to How to Write Good. I am your host, Daniel Poppie. You can find out more about me at danielpoppie.com. If it is your first time here, How to Write Good is a writing podcast that seeks to find principles and advice that can be applied across a broad range of writing situations. If you've been here before, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button below, and share. So politics is a thing I see a lot in many different artistic areas or fields or whatever you want to call it. It's especially prevalent in punk rock and then music in general. For whatever reason, musicians think they need to bring politics into their music. And I think it's because that there's a understanding among people who do something artistic that what they are doing is an extraneous thing. It's something that people could live without if they needed to, if that makes sense. You know, if you are someone who is farming, if you're someone who's creating food, you're literally creating food, whether through growing it or pasturing, or animal husbandry or whatever you want to call it. If you're doing that, I think you don't think about the value of what you're doing as much, because there is a very clear inherent value to that thing. People need to eat, therefore you're providing a specific thing to them. And I think what happens with people in the music industry especially is I don't know if they don't have the vocabulary to express it, or I think that there's a lot of people in artistic fields who are moodier, and they are just I wouldn't call them outcasts, because they certainly have their place in the world, and they certainly have their fans, and they certainly have other artists that are around them that they fit in with. But I think that I would say that they're moodier. They're people that feel like they don't fit in as well. I would guess that is the case, that even if they do fit in, they feel like they don't. And then you have their art that they're making, whether you want to call it art or not, and that's what is art is a very big topic. But whether or not you want to call it art or not, if I can be redundant, I think that they feel like they need to make it relevant. I think there is this movement, or there is this idea that is prevalent among many people in the music industry and in art in general, where they think they need to make their art profound and relevant to the world they live in at this certain time. And that has been the case, I think, for a very long time. And it's especially, like I said, it's especially the case in the music industry, and I'm not sure exactly why. Maybe it's the case that musicians are more collectivist, if I may say that. They're people who are more likely to be connected to a lot more people, right? I don't think that there's politics in as many books. It definitely is in the literary field, but I think it's more in music, and I think it's very prevalent in music because people in music, first of all, it's easier to connect to your audience, but I think that they are more likely to see themselves as they think that they have a very big role in society. And I'm not trying to denigrate musicians at all, but I think that that's their idea. And I think that certain people within writing do view themselves as, I need to write, I need to have a very big role in society in general. But I think what happens to writers is because they tend to be more introverted, or they tend not to have a huge circle around them, they kind of get beat down by that situation, and they suddenly realize that they would just rather write. And there are those certain people who will just think they're God's gift to mankind forever, so they will continue to think that what they say and what they think is the most important thing ever. But going back to this idea of musicians being a little bit more, I don't want to say collectivist, but they have more people around them that they know, and they talk to other musicians more than writers talk to other writers, in my opinion. You create a band, you don't create a writing group, or you don't necessarily create a writing group. But with musicians, I think that if you are connecting to other people, people are sharing different ideas, and it's more likely that people are going to see you if you are a musician and try to use you or co-opt you for their ideas, because you're more prevalent, you're more salient, and every person who is more salient is going to get good things about them and bad things about them. You're just going to come across more good things and more bad things because you're salient in relation to other people. Other people are going to interact with you in more positive ways in general and in more negative ways in general just because they see you more. But despite the fact that there are politics in a lot of different types of creative works, from music to writing to artistic endeavors to ceramics to whatever you want to call it, there's all these different creative areas. And despite the fact that there's different people with different ideas, with politics and fiction, I would say it's something that has popped up before. And maybe we should say ideology in fiction, but I don't know if you can get your ideology out of your fiction. But if we're talking about all of these different art forms, but we're specifically talking about politics within fiction, I think that it's generally a negative thing. I'm actually against overt politics in fiction in general, right? I'm not, but at the same time, I'm not really, because what I think is that when people bring in politics, they aren't good enough to make it good, if that makes sense. Because there is a place to present your ideas through different artistic mediums, and I'm not going to say, oh, you are doing this for a specific reason, you're trying to convey specific reasons, right? I think that you can try to convey specific reasons through artistic expression, and you can do it in a good way and you can do it in a bad way. Now, the first bad way you can do it in is that you're just not good enough. And I think that with politics and fiction, the majority of people aren't good enough to put their politics in fiction and make it work. They're just not good enough. I think that probably 90% of writers are not skilled enough and they do not understand their ideas well enough to get it into the writing in a way that works, right? And this happens on any side of the aisle you are. I don't like to think of sides anymore because it really doesn't make sense in terms of politics. The sides argument, like, oh, you have, in Western politics, I don't know about outside of the West. In Western politics, you have the right and you have the left. And it all springs from this idea of the French Revolution, where the people who wanted the status quo, the people who wanted to keep the royalty, if I'm remembering it correctly, sat on the right, and the people who wanted revolution sat on the left. Well, politics, like, I think it's stupid to think of things as right and left because it doesn't make sense. You have, in the United States, you have the Republicans, you have the Democrats, right? And we say, oh, this person's on the right and the left. But then you have other groups that kind of have similar ideas to each of those groups, but differ in other ways. And politics isn't binary because there's not two choices. There's not two choices and there's not two solutions for every problem. Most problems have more than one solution, right? So this happens on both sides, quote unquote. But both sides have good writers who have done it well. And I would say that George Orwell, if you want to say that he's on one side of the aisle and he's talking about one specific thing, he's very anti-authoritarian and he talked about anti-authoritarianism. And then you had Vonnegut, who was talking about a different issue. He wrote anti-war books. He at least wrote one anti-war book with Slaughterhouse-Five, right? Which I would say is an anti-war book. So you have people who have been on... They've thought different things about different types of political issues or things that are political in nature, and they've written books that are against a specific thing that is in relation to politics or overtly political, and they've done it in ways that are good, right? But most people aren't good enough. I think most people are not good enough to do it in that way. I don't think most people have the skill to write in that way, and I think it's for anyone who is going out and wanting to write, if you have this idea, if you have an idea that, oh, it's so important that I have to put this specific idea into the book, you better be really good at doing it, because what's going to happen is you're going to alienate whoever disagrees with you. And I have a podcast that talks about not having straw men when you're writing. This is before I shifted to a shorter format, I believe. But I talked about this idea that when you write, you should not straw man things you disagree with. You should try to understand things you disagree with to the fullest extent of how you can understand them, so you can write full characters, so you can write full ideas. Because one of the things that I always harp on as well is the reason why we have art is so we can understand different things we didn't understand before. And if we're just sticking with our politics, the issue with politics really in art is that it puts us into camps. Right? It says, oh, I think this specific thing, therefore I'm going to put it in my writing. And because you put it in your writing, everybody who agrees with you is going to nod their head, and everybody who disagrees with you is going to shake their head in a manner of speaking. There is a caveat to this. So when you are writing, you have to decide and find your way through the creative sphere yourself. Okay, so if you are someone who is writing and you're learning and you want to know how to write well, and you want to know how to present stories well, or you want to know how to do anything well in the area you're working, there is probably going to be a part of your work where you're experimenting with different ideas. And when you get to that point, if you do get to that point, I think that you need to understand that you are not the end-all be-all when it comes to those specific ideas, and there are certainly philosophers who have dealt with those ideas in ways that are a lot more sophisticated than you, and probably better than you in some respects. So I think that you need to be humble as you go through that, and I don't like to dissuade people from taking on different ideas, but I think that it's important to see the nuance on both sides, or the multiple different sides, because it's not necessarily two. I think that in American politics, if you're listening to this, you're not in the United States, we think of political things in the binary. Political things do not work in the binary necessarily. There are a lot of different ways to do different things, and we're just trying to find the best way. So but in the United States, if you are an American writer, what you need to do, I think, if you want to work in that world, is try to pull yourself away from that binary. And you might have criticisms for one side of the aisle or the other, and I'm thinking in the binary, of course. You might have criticisms on one side or the other, but I think you need to try to extend past that so you can deal with political things, because you need to figure out your own way. You need to grow as a writer, you need to grow as an artist, you need to just figure out what works. But when you put politics in writing, this is my opinion, I think it is the case. I think you are kneecapping yourself creatively, right? If you're putting your politics in writing, or if you are only thinking about politics, I think you are kneecapping yourself creatively. And it will probably pay. That's the thing about it. If you put politics in your writing and it's overtly political, whatever group agrees with that is going to pay for it. And this goes along with very overtly religious things as well. There are certain cases where you can I'm not saying don't put overt politics in the book. I'm not saying don't put overt religion in the book. But there is a difference between proselytizing through the book and telling a story using those specific ideas, if that makes sense, right? And if you wanted to deal with a specific type of politics, if you wanted to say, hey, what is this political idea, and I want to see how it plays out in the real world, that is a different thing as well, because you're trying to approach it as honestly as you can. But the issue is that people are so wound up in their politics that they say, hey, I want to write this book, and of course I'm going to put this idea in it because it's an axiom. It's so true that nobody's going to disagree with me. And everybody who disagrees with me is an idiot. And that's how people see, and that's how people function in politics, because politics makes you stupid, right? Politics makes you think, oh, I'm in this camp, therefore this camp must be right. But if you want to do anything creative that matters, I think that you need to break yourself out of that mindset, whoever you are. And again, if you don't break yourself out of that mindset, it might pay. It might pay you a lot because you're pandering to a specific group, right? Creative, and the reason why I say this is because creative works are supposed to push the boundaries, but not just for the sake of pushing the boundaries. They're pushing the boundaries to find truth, right? We are pushing the boundaries to see what is truth and what is not true. We are trying to push the boundaries to express things in our lives or other people's lives. We're trying to express ideas. We're trying to express experiences. We're not just trying to get to this, the idea of absolute truth. We're trying to get to a sense of how does this situation feel to a specific person. It's very There's different layers to this. It's what is actually true. What is how does this play out in the real world? How does this feel to a particular person? And different things like that. Can I convey what a light bulb looks to someone so that if they never saw a light bulb, they know what it was, right? That's kind of what we're doing. We're trying to take these different things we see, the phenomenon in the world, and we're trying to express those things as clearly as possible so the people reading, or whatever creative field you're in, people listening, the people seeing your work, whatever creative field you're in, I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to express those things in a way so those people understand it more clearly and more in depth and more on a experiential level than they would have before. And politics, in some cases, people are probably right in their politics. It's probably the case that it should be the case that politics should go one way or the other. But if you're in a creative field, I think you're not in the business of trying to shove your ideas down someone's throat. In some cases, you might be presenting your ideas to people, but not shoving it down their throat. And I've seen far too many things that are political that are just shoving stuff down people's throat. And it takes away the enjoyment. It takes away the focus, which is trying to get that experience across to people. Welcome to How to Write Good. I am your host, Daniel Poppie. You can find out more about me at danielpoppie.com. If it is your first time here, How to Write Good is a writing podcast that seeks to find principles and advice that can be applied across a broad range of writing situations. If you've been here before, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button below, and share.